You stopped sending the message that would reopen the conversation, and something in them changed almost immediately. The person who could leave you waiting suddenly began checking whether you were still there. Your fingers hovered above the phone, trained to repair the distance. But this time you did nothing. Their calm disappeared the moment your pursuit did. At first, you may have mistaken their reaction for proof that they had finally understood your value. They called more often. Their tone softened. Questions appeared where indifference had been. The affection you had waited for seemed to arrive precisely when you stopped asking for it. Yet something about its timing disturbed you. Their panic did not begin when you were hurting. It began when your hurt no longer made you move toward them. They had watched you explain, forgive, wait, and return without becoming alarmed. What unsettled them was not the pain they had caused. It was the discovery that pain was no longer guaranteeing your availability. This is the detail that changes the meaning of the relationship. They may have cared for you in ways that were real, but their sense of security had come to depend on your pursuit. As long as you kept reaching, they never had to ask whether they were reaching back. Your effort protected them from that question. You were the one who converted silence into conversation. You turned ambiguity into explanations and emotional distance into another chance. Whenever the bond weakened, you supplied the movement required to keep it alive. They could remain uncertain because you were certain for both of you. Once you stopped, the relationship became visible without your labor covering its imbalance. The unanswered message was no longer an invitation for you to try harder. Their withdrawal no longer produced reassurance. For the first time, distance did not increase your pursuit. It returned the uncertainty to the person who had created it. That uncertainty may appear as tenderness, but it can also arrive as irritation. They may ask why you have changed, accuse you of becoming cold, or behave as though your silence were an injury against them. The same distance they once expected you to tolerate suddenly feels unbearable when they must inhabit it themselves. Your throat may tighten when their name appears. The old response prepares itself before thought arrives. You want to answer quickly, not only because you miss them, but because their discomfort awakens a familiar responsibility in you. Their panic becomes another feeling you are tempted to manage. This is where stopping becomes more complicated than simply refusing contact. You are not only withdrawing effort from another person, you are interrupting a role in which their uncertainty became your emergency. The moment they become distressed, you feel pressure to restore the arrangement that was exhausting you. You may call this compassion, sometimes it is compassion, yet compassion does not explain why their discomfort feels more urgent than your own. It does not explain why you could endure weeks of uncertainty, while one anxious message from them makes you abandon what you had finally recognized. The chase was never only movement toward another person. It was also movement away from a conclusion. As long as you kept trying, you did not have to know what would remain if you stopped. Pursuit preserved the hope that enough patience, clarity, or love could eventually make the relationship mutual. This is the first painful reversal. You were not always chasing them because they were moving toward you slowly. Sometimes you were chasing because their stillness already contained an answer you were not ready to receive. Effort allowed you to interpret absence as delay instead of limitation. When your effort ends, interpretation loses its protective power. You see what they do without being prompted, reminded, reassured, or emotionally guided. You see whether they seek your inner reality or merely confirm that access remains available. Their panic reveals what your pursuit had prevented you from observing. It may reveal that they were attached to your presence without being prepared for reciprocity. It may reveal that they wanted the comfort of being loved more than the exposure of loving responsibly. It may also reveal genuine feeling that had remained passive because your effort made passivity possible. These truths do not require turning them into a cruel person. Human beings often become dependent on arrangements they never consciously designed. When one person repeatedly repairs the bond, the other can gradually experience that repair as part of the relationship itself. What began as your generosity becomes the structure they expect. Through a Jungian lens, such a pattern can become a complex, an emotional arrangement that acts before either person understands it. Their withdrawal activates your pursuit. Your pursuit relieves their uncertainty. Their relief confirms that they do not need to change. Repetition gives the pattern the appearance of destiny. The complex does not need anyone to plan it. It only needs each person to keep performing the response the other has come to expect. You reach when they retreat, they return when you detach. The bond remains intense because neither person stays still long enough to discover what exists without the pattern. Intensity can feel like evidence of depth, yet a relationship may feel most intense precisely because security never becomes stable. Each disappearance creates longing. Each return creates relief. Relief is then mistaken for intimacy, even though the underlying arrangement has not become more mutual. Their panic may therefore touch the part of you that still wants a final confirmation. You wanted to know that your absence would matter. Now, their sudden urgency seems to answer that longing, but being missed is not the same as being met, and being pursued after withdrawal is not the same as being chosen during presence. Notice what happens when they sense you moving away. Promises may become specific, memories may be summoned, future possibilities may suddenly sound vivid. The person who could not name what they wanted may become remarkably articulate when your availability is no longer assumed. Loss gives language to feelings that responsibility left vague. Some of those feelings may be sincere. Panic does not automatically make affection false. It does, however, reveal what was required before that affection became active. If care appears only when access is threatened, you are allowed to notice that care and consistency have not been occupying the same place. Your chest may soften when they say what you once begged to hear. Then your stomach drops because another recognition follows. They knew the language. They understood the need. What had been missing was not always awareness. Sometimes it was the necessity to respond while they still believed you would remain. This recognition can feel harsher than rejection. Rejection would at least give the grief a clear shape. Their panic gives you exactly enough evidence of feeling to reopen the question. You are left wondering whether the relationship was almost capable of becoming what you needed, or capable only when it feared ending. That ambiguity is why you may resume the chase even after they begin chasing you. The moment they return, you explain your silence, soothe their fear, and reassure them that you still care. Soon the old balance is restored. Their urgency fades because your availability has once again become certain. Then you blame yourself for believing them. Yet what drew you back was not foolishness. It was the hope that urgency represented transformation rather than temporary alarm. You wanted their fear of losing you to become an ability to remain emotionally present after the fear had passed. The difference becomes visible only with time. Panic produces movement, but it does not necessarily produce capacity. Someone can fear your absence without knowing how to meet you in closeness. They can reach intensely while losing access, then return to distance once your presence has calmed them. What their panic reveals is not one simple verdict about whether they love you. It reveals the function your chasing performed. Your pursuit protected them from longing, uncertainty, accountability, and the possibility that you might have needs they could not answer. It kept the relationship emotionally available at a cost they did not have to carry. It also reveals something more difficult about you. Chasing gave you a form of control within uncertainty. You could not make them choose you, but you could prevent the silence from becoming final. You could send another message, offer another interpretation, and keep the bond from reaching its own conclusion. Stopping removes that control. You must feel the distance without converting it into action. You must watch their discomfort without immediately making yourself responsible for it. This can feel less like strength than exposure, because the role that once protected you from helplessness is no longer available. The silence that follows is therefore not empty. It contains two forms of panic. Theirs becomes visible through sudden pursuit, anger, tenderness, or confusion. Yours may remain quieter, appearing as guilt, restlessness, and the urge to prove that stopping does not mean you never cared. You may be tempted to explain your withdrawal so perfectly that they cannot misunderstand it. Yet another explanation can become the chase wearing a more dignified face. It still places you in charge of helping them understand what their own experience might now be asking them to face. Their reaction does not tell you everything about their character, but it reveals everything about the old arrangement. They felt secure while you were uncertain. They became uncertain when you stopped providing that security. The relationship had been balanced by your willingness to carry what neither person wanted to name. This is why the moment feels both clarifying and unbearable. You are not merely discovering how they respond when access is threatened. You are discovering how much of the bond depended on you, never allowing the distance to speak for itself. What looked like devotion had also become a way of preventing reality from finishing its sentence. Once reality begins finishing that sentence, you start to see how much work was required to interrupt it. You did not simply contact them because you wanted connection. You learned to enter every uncertain space before it could acquire meaning. A delayed answer became something to clarify. A change in tone became something to repair. Their hesitation became an assignment. Over time, this response stopped feeling like a choice. You became the person who initiated difficult conversations, named what was happening, and found the gentle language that allowed both of you to continue. Because you performed these tasks well, the relationship could appear emotionally mature while depending almost entirely on your willingness to make it so. Your competence concealed the absence of reciprocity. Anyone watching from outside might have seen two people repeatedly finding their way back to each other. They could not see that you were studying every rupture, adjusting every approach, and carrying the emotional memory of what had never been resolved. Reconciliation looked shared because the result included both of you. Yet the route back was usually built by one person. You remembered which words would make them defensive and which tone would keep them present. You waited until their mood softened before naming your pain. Even your honesty had to be arranged around their capacity to hear it. Connection depended on your ability to make truth comfortable. This arrangement protected something important. It allowed you to remain connected without directly confronting whether the other person could tolerate your full emotional reality. If you translated yourself carefully enough, you could believe that the problem was communication. The alternative was more painful. Perhaps they understood enough, but mutuality was asking more than they wished to give. Communication then became a place to hide from recognition. You kept searching for the sentence that would finally cross the distance. Each failed attempt suggested that the next explanation needed more precision, more tenderness, or better timing. The failure remained yours to solve because that was less final than admitting the relationship might be organized around your effort. This did not always begin with one dramatic rejection. It may have grown through years of small rewards. People praised your patience. Partners called you understanding. Friends came to you because you could see every side. Gradually, the ability to preserve connection became part of how you recognized your own goodness. A persona formed around being the person who does not give up easily. In Jungian terms, the persona is the social identity through which a person earns belonging and functions among others. It is not necessarily false. The problem begins when one useful way of relating becomes the only self you are permitted to be. Your persistence may genuinely belong to you. Your tenderness may be real. Your willingness to understand another person may be one of your finest qualities. Yet each quality became compulsory when stopping began to feel like cruelty. What was once freely given turned into evidence you had to provide in order to remain the person you believed yourself to be. This is how the pattern entered your moral identity. Leaving a message unanswered did not feel neutral. It felt like becoming careless. Allowing someone to misunderstand you felt dishonest. Refusing to repair what they had damaged felt like punishment. You measured your character by how much relational discomfort you were willing to absorb. The reward was subtle but powerful. Pursuit allowed you to remain innocent of ending anything. If the relationship failed, no one could say you had not tried. You could leave only after exhausting every explanation, every concession, and every possible interpretation. Your effort became a witness that protected you from guilt. But it also kept you in relationships long after the central truth had appeared. You were waiting for certainty strong enough to overpower attachment. Since human relationships rarely provide such clean certainty, you continued gathering evidence. One warm conversation weakened the meaning of several cold ones. One apology reopened a pattern you had already understood. The arrangement spread beyond romantic closeness. At work, you followed up when others remained vague. In friendships, you made the plan after everyone expressed interest but offered no movement. Within family, you called first because otherwise too much time would pass. You became the bridge, then wondered why everyone behaved as though bridges built themselves. People may have loved you and still grown accustomed to this function. They did not necessarily decide that you should carry the connection. They simply experienced the relationship as continuing. Your initiative was folded into their expectation of you, while the fatigue behind it remained private. That privacy mattered. You rarely announced how much effort the bond required because doing so would change the meaning of your generosity. You wanted to be chosen without having to demand it. So you performed the labor silently and waited for someone to notice what you were providing. When they did not, resentment entered where direct recognition had been avoided. The resentment embarrassed you. It seemed to contradict the generous identity you had maintained. You told yourself that if love were sincere, it should not keep accounts. Yet resentment was not always counting favors. Sometimes it was recording the repeated experience of making a relationship possible while pretending it existed by itself. Your jaw tightened at small requests that once seemed easy. Your shoulders lifted when another vague message arrived. Nothing in the immediate moment appeared serious enough to justify the reaction. The accumulated pattern, however, was already responding. The next request carried the weight of every initiative that had quietly become your responsibility. Because the burden was difficult to explain, you often questioned whether you were asking too much. They did respond sometimes. They could be loving, attentive, and present. The confusion came from inconsistency rather than total absence. Enough affection existed to preserve hope, but not enough steadiness existed to let you stop managing the bond. Intermittent closeness made your effort feel necessary. When pursuit occasionally produced tenderness, the mind connected the two. You reached, and they opened. You explained, and they softened. You stayed, and the bond revived. What remained less visible was whether tenderness could have appeared without you first, creating the conditions for it. The relationship trained you to regard your exhaustion as the price of access. You did not merely want their attention. You wanted the version of them that appeared after the right amount of patience, distance, reassurance, or emotional work. Their warmth seemed valuable partly because reaching it required so much of you. Difficulty then acquired the emotional weight of significance. An easy bond could feel strangely thin because it did not activate the abilities through which you had learned to create closeness. Someone consistent gave you little to interpret. Someone direct left no hidden distance to cross. Without pursuit, you were uncertain what made you necessary. This is the hidden reward the pattern offered. Chasing kept you central to the relationship. Even when you felt neglected, you remained the person organizing its emotional direction. The role was painful, but it protected you from a different vulnerability. You never had to stand still and discover whether someone would move toward you without being guided. Receiving another person's initiative can be more exposing than offering your own. When you reach first, you control the moment and prepare for the response. When you wait, you must tolerate not knowing whether you exist in their mind with the same force that they exist in yours. Pursuit replaced that uncertainty with action. The action created temporary relief. After sending the message, your breath could move again. You had done something even before they answered. The helplessness diminished because the relationship was once more being carried by your effort. This relief quietly taught you to repeat the behavior whenever distance appeared. Their response completed the lesson. If they returned warmly, your pursuit seemed wise. If they answered coldly, you searched for a better approach. If they did not respond, you wondered whether you had spoken too soon or asked too much. Nearly every outcome returned responsibility to you. The pattern became self-confirming. Their passivity activated more of your effort, and your effort made their passivity sustainable. The more capable you became at restoring contact, the less evidence either of you received about what they would do without restoration. Your strength prevented the relationship from revealing its natural limits. This was not weakness disguised as devotion. It was an intelligent adaptation to uncertainty. Action felt better than waiting. Interpretation felt better than conclusion. Hope felt more bearable than grief. The pattern survived because it offered a way to remain connected without demanding a clear answer from someone whose answer might not protect the bond. Yet, the price was not only exhaustion. You gradually lost access to your own spontaneous response. Before asking whether you wanted to call, you asked whether the relationship needed you to call. Before noticing anger, you searched for their reason. Before feeling disappointment, you began constructing the explanation that would make disappointment easier to dismiss. Your emotional life became organized around maintaining possibility. Feelings that supported continuation were welcomed. Patience, empathy, and hope had a place. Feelings that threatened the arrangement had to be revised. Anger became misunderstanding. Fatigue became a difficult week. The wish to stop became fear that you were becoming unkind. What Jung called the shadow often contains precisely these excluded responses, not because they are shameful, but because the conscious identity has no acceptable place for them. Your refusal, indifference, skepticism, and desire to be met without effort did not disappear. They gathered beneath the person who was always willing to understand. When you finally stopped chasing, these buried responses did not arrive as a dramatic declaration. They appeared as a missing impulse. You saw the message and did not know what else to say. You noticed the distance and felt no fresh explanation forming. The role failed quietly before your conscious identity accepted that anything had changed. Their panic then confronted you with the reward you had secretly wanted. They were finally moving without being guided. They were demonstrating that your absence had weight, yet the demonstration appeared only after you had begun leaving the role that once needed it most. This is why their pursuit now creates such conflict. It offers evidence that you mattered while reviving the exact structure that made you doubt it. If you respond as before, their panic may settle and the old distribution of effort may return. If you remain still, you must face a question your chasing postponed for years. You do not yet know whether they are moving toward you or merely toward the return of certainty. That question cannot be answered by the urgency of their first return. Urgency tells you that something has been disturbed. It does not tell you what will remain after the disturbance settles. The deeper evidence appears only when they cannot immediately recover the version of you who once made uncertainty disappear. This is where their panic may intensify. They send another message, then another. They ask whether someone else has entered your life. They remember details they once overlooked and speak of a future they previously kept vague. The emotional force can be overwhelming because it resembles the commitment you had wanted before you became tired of asking. You may feel relief before suspicion appears. Part of you has waited a long time to see them cross the distance. Their pursuit seems to restore something that repeated hesitation had damaged. For a moment, you are no longer the one proving that the bond matters. They are carrying the fear of losing it. Then anger arrives beside the relief. Why did your pain never create this clarity? Why did your presence allow confusion? While your possible absence produces certainty, the timing makes their tenderness difficult to receive. What should feel like recognition also exposes how long recognition was postponed. Your anger may frighten you more than their panic does. You know how to respond to longing. You know how to soothe fear. Anger is different. It refuses to translate their reaction into evidence that everything can now be repaired. It remembers how often your openness was met with delay. The forbidden thought may be that you want them to remain uncomfortable, not because you wish to punish them, but because their discomfort is the first evidence that the emotional weight has crossed the distance between you. For once, they are feeling uncertainty without handing it back for you to resolve. This is one shadow reversal within the separation. Your silence may not be made entirely of clarity. A hidden part of you may be watching to see how far they will come. After years of pursuing, you may want their pursuit to repay the doubt you carried. Their panic becomes a test they do not know they are taking. There is no shame in recognizing this. The wish to be pursued often contains an old hunger for proof. You want to know whether they will keep reaching when you do not reward the first attempt. You want their effort to become proportionate to everything you gave. Yet no amount of present alarm can return the time spent waiting. If you use silence only to reverse the balance, the old structure remains alive. The roles have changed, but uncertainty is still being used to generate movement. One person retreats, so the other will prove attachment. The relationship remains organized around fear. Even when you are no longer the one chasing, stopping is therefore not complete when they begin pursuing you. It becomes real only when their pursuit is no longer the goal of your withdrawal. Otherwise, your distance still belongs to them. It is still designed around what they might feel, do, confess, or finally understand. This recognition can leave you strangely empty. You thought stopping would either end the relationship or make them choose you. Instead, it reveals a third condition. They may return intensely while you remain unable to trust what the return means. The answer you wanted arrives in a form that cannot answer the deeper question. Their panic may be entirely sincere in the moment. They may truly feel love, grief, regret, and fear. Human feeling does not become false merely because it arrives late, but sincerity in crisis is different from the capacity to remain present when nothing is being lost. Loss concentrates attention. It makes the familiar suddenly vivid. The person they assumed would remain becomes psychologically real when departure becomes possible. They notice your importance because the structure that contained you is shaking. This can awaken genuine feeling without yet changing the habits that made your importance easy to neglect. You may hear them say that they never knew how serious the distance had become. Part of you wants to believe this because it protects the possibility that they would have responded differently if only they had understood. Another part remembers how many times you tried to make the distance visible without threatening to leave. The conflict tightens in your body. Your chest becomes still while listening to their apology. Your mouth prepares reassurance, yet your jaw refuses to soften. Compassion and memory are no longer moving in the same direction. You can understand their fear while remaining unable to forget what their comfort required from you. Previously, understanding would have settled the matter. Once you knew why they withdrew, you made their behavior easier to bear. Their history, fear, confusion, or emotional limits became explanations that reduced your right to respond. Now understanding remains present, but it no longer automatically restores access. That change may feel like cruelty, because your identity once linked love with endless interpretation. If you could see the wound beneath their behavior, you believed you should remain patient with its effects. Refusal seemed shallow when deeper understanding was available. You forgot that explanation and permission are not the same act. Through a depth psychology perspective, understanding can become a defense against grief. As long as another person remains psychologically explainable, hope can remain intellectually active. You can study their hesitation instead of accepting its consequence. Their inner conflict becomes more compelling than your lived experience beside it. Their panic gives this defense new material. Now there are apologies to analyze, promises to evaluate, and sudden vulnerability to interpret. The relationship becomes psychologically rich again at the exact moment you were beginning to accept a simpler truth. Whatever they felt, you had been lonely inside the bond. That loneliness does not disappear because they are frightened now. It may even become more visible. Their intensity shows that they possess emotional energy, attention, and language. The discovery hurts because you had often assumed they were incapable of offering what you needed. Now you see that capacity appeared when the consequence reached them. Still, fear can temporarily enlarge a person. Someone may say more under threat than they can embody in ordinary life. They may become attentive because attention is urgently required, then lose access to that attentiveness when security returns. Their panic may reveal feeling without proving that feeling can become a stable way of relating. You cannot learn this through promises alone. Promises belong to the imagined future, where no ordinary frustration has yet tested them. The more dramatic the promise, the more tempting it becomes to skip over the present. Yet the present contains the only question that matters now. Can they tolerate your changed position without demanding immediate restoration? They may say they respect your need for distance, then repeatedly ask when the distance will end. They may apologize, then become angry when the apology does not produce access. They may offer patience while making you responsible for relieving their uncertainty. Their response to your limit reveals more than their language about love. This does not mean every attempt to contact you is manipulation. Someone who fears losing a meaningful bond may naturally seek clarity. The distinction lies in whether they can recognize you as a separate person whose hesitation has meaning, or whether your hesitation exists only as an obstacle to their relief. The more they panic, the more responsible you may feel for what happens next. Their sleeplessness, confusion, or visible grief may awaken the familiar role. Your shoulders lift as though another emotional task has been placed before you. You begin composing a response that will be honest enough to protect yourself and gentle enough to protect them. No response can accomplish both perfectly. If you speak clearly, they may feel rejected. If you soften everything, your meaning may disappear. If you remain silent, guilt may accuse you of repeating the very distance that wounded you. Separation offers no position from which everyone remains untouched. This is the social cost hidden inside personal clarity. When you stop performing the function that kept another person calm, their pain becomes visible. You may then appear responsible for creating what your effort had merely concealed. The relationship seems to break when you stop carrying it. Although the imbalance existed long before the break became observable, guilt enters through this confusion. You wonder whether continuing would be kinder because you can see exactly how to restore stability. A message, a meeting, or one more explanation might settle everything temporarily. Your competence remains available even when your willingness has begun to disappear. The fact that you can repair the bond does not tell you whether repair is honest. Ability and consent are different. You may know how to become reassuring again, while recognizing that the reassuring version of you cannot keep returning without losing contact with resentment, fatigue, and truth. Grief then moves beyond the possible loss of the person. You grieve the identity that knew what to do. The pursuer was exhausted, but rarely helpless. There was always another gesture available. Without that role, you stand before a relationship you cannot improve through greater effort. And this powerlessness feels almost unfamiliar. You may also grieve the fantasy that their eventual pursuit would settle your doubt. For years, you imagined that if they finally feared losing you, you would feel chosen. Now they are afraid, and the feeling is not clean. Satisfaction, tenderness, anger, suspicion, and sorrow arrive together. This emotional mixture is not indecision. It is what appears when a simple story can no longer contain the relationship. They were not necessarily without feeling. You were not merely generous. Their distance protected them, and your pursuit protected you. Both of you participated in keeping the deeper uncertainty from becoming final. The difference is that you can no longer perform your part without seeing it. Consciousness has entered the pattern, and consciousness rarely brings immediate peace. It removes the innocence of repetition before providing another way to relate. What once happened automatically now requires a choice you do not yet feel prepared to make. You may still love them, you may still want them to come closer, you may even believe that their fear has awakened something important. Yet, wanting the relationship no longer allows you to ignore the conditions under which it previously remained alive. You cannot return to chasing, but you do not yet know what their return deserves. That uncertainty does not need to be resolved by the emotional force of the moment. Their return deserves neither automatic rejection nor automatic reward. It becomes another reality to observe. For the first time, the relationship is not being decided by who feels the greatest panic, but by what each person can carry when certainty is absent. They may expect the old version of you to appear as soon as they become vulnerable. In the past, their openness was rare enough to make every other concern disappear. You responded to the smallest confession with extraordinary tenderness because you knew how difficult disclosure was for them. Their difficulty became the measure of what you were allowed to require. Now their vulnerability may still touch you without erasing your memory. You can hear the fear in their voice and also remember the conversations they avoided. You can recognize that they are suffering without converting their suffering into proof that the relationship has changed. Two truths remain present where one once cancelled the other. They may experience this as coldness. The reassurance that previously arrived so quickly is no longer immediate. Your pauses feel longer to them because they are finally living inside the uncertainty you used to absorb. They may say you have become distant, when what has changed is your willingness to protect them from every consequence of distance. Others may reinforce their interpretation. Mutual friends can see the person who is now reaching for you, but they may not have witnessed the years in which you carried the bond. To them, your restraint can seem unnecessarily severe. Visible panic attracts sympathy more easily than invisible exhaustion. You may be told that everyone makes mistakes, that love requires forgiveness, or that you should at least hear them out. Such statements are not always malicious. People often prefer reconciliation because it restores a familiar social order. Your separation disturbs more than one relationship when others have grown accustomed to you being the one who repairs things. Family may recognize the same change in smaller moments. You no longer call simply because silence makes everyone uncomfortable. You stop translating one person's behavior for another. You allow an awkward gathering to remain awkward instead of becoming cheerful enough for the entire group. They say you are not yourself because the old function is missing. Yet this new position does not always feel like becoming more yourself. Sometimes it feels like having no role at all. You are present without managing the emotional temperature. You hear disappointment without rushing to alter it. The absence of your usual response can make you feel detached from your own identity. The persona that once organized closeness does not disappear gracefully. It returns as self-accusation. It asks whether a loving person would really remain silent while someone else is afraid. It reminds you of every tender moment and questions whether your refusal has become too absolute. Its language sounds moral because morality once kept the role secure. But love cannot be measured only by the speed with which you relieve another person's discomfort. Sometimes the faster reassurance arrives, the less either person learns about what the discomfort contains. Their panic may contain affection, but it may also contain entitlement, dependence, regret, and fear of losing a familiar source of emotional stability. These elements can exist together. Entitlement does not erase affection. Affection does not erase entitlement. A person may genuinely miss you while also missing the certainty your pursuit provided. They may long for your presence and still resist the changes required to meet you without depending on your self-abandonment. This is why the panic reveals so much without revealing a simple answer. It shows what your chasing had been holding in place. It shows how secure they felt when the risk of loss belonged mostly to you. It shows which feelings become available when access is threatened, and which feelings remain dormant while access was guaranteed. What happens after panic begins to settle carries a different kind of truth. If their attention disappears as soon as you respond, the urgency was bound to uncertainty. If they become resentful when you do not recover quickly, their concern was still organized around restoring comfort. If they remain present without demanding a result, another capacity may be emerging. That emergence would not erase the past. It would not mean your pursuit had been necessary or that waiting had finally been rewarded. It would simply mean the relationship is encountering a possibility it could not encounter while one person supplied all the movement. Whether that possibility can become durable remains unknown. They may begin to speak with less drama and more responsibility. Instead of promising that everything will be different, they may become curious about what the old arrangement cost you. Instead of defending each incident, they may recognize the pattern connecting them. Their words may become quieter because they are no longer being used to end the crisis immediately. Or they may continue making your response the center of every conversation. They may describe their fear in great detail while showing little interest in the fatigue that preceded your withdrawal. They may ask for compassion without becoming able to offer it. Their pain may be sincere while remaining too dominant to create mutuality. The distinction becomes visible in ordinary moments. Can a conversation end without you reassuring them that another one is guaranteed? Can they hear hesitation without turning it into accusation? Can they allow you to be uncertain without treating uncertainty as betrayal? Their relationship to your separateness reveals more than the intensity of their desire. Your own separateness must also become more than a test. If every delay is designed to measure their effort, you remain psychologically tied to the chase. You may no longer send the messages, but their behavior still determines your inner position. Freedom from pursuit begins quietly when silence no longer asks them to prove what your effort could not secure. This does not require indifference. You may check your phone and feel disappointed when nothing appears. You may miss their voice while remembering why listening had become painful. Your eyes may move toward the screen before you stop yourself. Longing can remain after the arrangement that once expressed it has become impossible to continue. The deeper separation is not from feeling. It is from the belief that every feeling must become an action that restores the bond. Missing them does not automatically produce pursuit. Their sadness does not automatically produce surrender. Affection remains human while losing its old authority over your behavior. There may be days when the absence feels peaceful and others when it feels unbearable. Relief can coexist with grief because the relationship provided more than one experience. It may have contained genuine tenderness, shared history, humor, and recognition. The fact that its structure became painful does not make every part of it false. Holding this complexity protects you from moral superiority. You are not the conscious one standing above someone who finally learned your value. You participated in the arrangement because it protected hope, identity, and attachment. They participated because it protected comfort, distance, and certainty. Both roles had rewards, though the costs were not distributed equally. Seeing your participation does not make you responsible for their choices. It simply prevents separation from becoming another performance of innocence. You can admit that you sometimes preferred pursuit to helplessness. You can recognize that explaining them protected you from grief. The pattern belonged between you, even when you carried more of its weight. Once this is visible, their panic loses some of its hypnotic power. It no longer functions as the final proof that you mattered. You mattered while they were distant. You mattered before they became afraid. Their sudden recognition may be meaningful, but it does not create the value their earlier behavior failed to reflect. This may be the hardest recognition of all. You had imagined that being pursued would repair the humiliation of chasing. Instead, it shows that your worth and their response were never the same thing. Their capacity to recognize you may expand or remain limited, but neither outcome determines whether your needs were legitimate. If the bond ends, their panic may continue for a time. They may alternate between tenderness and anger because neither restores the old certainty. You may still wonder whether staying longer would have allowed something new to form. Separation rarely removes every alternative. It asks you to live without knowing what one more attempt might have produced. If the bond continues, it cannot continue as proof that your withdrawal worked. Returning under that interpretation would make distance another technique for obtaining devotion. The relationship would still depend on managing fear, only with greater sophistication. Any genuine continuation would have to exist without pursuit being used to create value. That continuation might feel quieter than the reconciliation you once imagined. There may be fewer dramatic confessions and more ordinary evidence. Initiative would no longer appear only after threat. Attention would not require disappearance. Neither person would need to create uncertainty in order to discover whether the other cared. Yet even a sincere change may arrive too late for part of you. Capacity can appear after trust has become tired. You may respect their effort without recovering your former desire. This does not make their change meaningless or your hesitation unfair. Psychological timing has consequences that apology cannot always reverse. They may truly become more available, and you may still be unable to return. They may remain unchanged, and you may still miss them deeply. The heart does not arrange itself according to moral logic. It can recognize what is insufficient while continuing to feel attached to what once carried hope. The old role promised that enough effort could prevent this contradiction. If you kept reaching, understanding, and repairing, perhaps love would never require an irreversible choice. Now the contradiction remains in your hands. You can care without chasing, grieve without returning, and remain uncertain without making uncertainty someone else's command. What their panic revealed was larger than their fear of losing you. It revealed the emotional labor hidden inside their former calm. It revealed how your movement allowed them to remain still, and how your explanations protected both of you from the meaning of that stillness. It also revealed that stopping does not instantly make you free. The impulse to rescue, test, interpret, and wait for proof may continue long after the messages stop. Separation begins externally in silence, but its deeper movement occurs when their reaction no longer organizes your understanding of yourself. You may never receive a clean confession that names the entire arrangement. They may understand only part of what happened. You may also continue discovering how deeply pursuit shaped your idea of love. The final recognition does not depend on either person achieving perfect insight. Their panic remained, but the old bargain had become visible.
Hello, I'm John, and I manage the psychoanalysis. Many of you come here seeking language for experience you have carried quietly for years. So I want to be transparent about how this film was made. This is an original essay inspired by Jungian psychology. AI-assisted tools support parts of the narration and visual production, while I personally review and edit every element. This is not archival footage or a lecture by Carl Jung. It is a contemporary interpretation offered for reflection, not therapy or medical advice. Thank you for trusting this space and for being here.